Hello, Innovation Stream friends. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you all for joining us today for EnergySource Innovation Stream, where we highlight new energy technologies with the potential to reshape the global energy system. Today, we will be hearing from Neil Hamel, head of U.S. Innovation and Venture Hub at Orsted, who will discuss how the hub identifies, fosters, and finances enterprises in the offshore wind space with a focus on next generation technology. I have several reminders before we get started. First, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and use the hashtag InnovationStream. Second, after Neil's presentation, you can submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. If you're watching on another platform like YouTube, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. So it's a big week for offshore wind. So it's with the announcement about California. So really, it's a great pleasure to welcome Neil to the Atlantic Council. Neil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Randy. Definitely happy to be here with you.
So Neil, how has the pandemic shaped the offshore wind industry in the United States? There seems to be a lot of momentum, but has the pandemic changed anything?
It certainly doesn't feel like it has. I mean, projects have stayed on track. The way that we've worked as a company has been pretty seamless. Like I myself joined the company on June 1st last year, and onboarding went extremely well virtually. As much as I would have loved to go to Denmark, meet my colleagues, and spend more time with people in person, I felt like it's been a really smooth transition.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great to hear that the momentum was able to continue despite all the difficulties of the past 15, 16 months or so. Well, we're really looking forward to hearing your presentation. So why don't we get started with that, and then we'll come back for Q&A in a little bit.
That sounds great. So it's very nice to be here with you all, and thank you for having me. Happy to talk with you about our innovation hub that's based in Rhode Island. I'm sure most people are familiar with Ørsted, but first wanted to give a brief overview. Our vision is to create a world that runs entirely on green energy. And we do that through three main business segments: offshore wind, which is where I'm based and we'll spend the time talking today. But we also have an onshore business unit, which includes onshore wind and solar and energy storage solutions. And we also have our markets and bioenergy division. And through those three segments, our BHAG, if you will, if I can toss out an old business acronym, is we aspire to become a global green energy major and the world's first global green energy major by using innovation to drive down costs and drive up production of green energy. If you probably have heard, but Ørsted was ranked the world's most sustainable energy company by Corporate Knights for the second time in a row. We aim to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we're well on our way to that goal. I think it's safe to say that we'll beat that goal. And even more audacious goal, though, is by 2040, we hope to have a completely carbon neutral footprint, and that's going to take a lot of work with our supply chain to accomplish, a lot of collaboration. So through the years, we basically helped start this industry back in 1991 with the first offshore wind site, and at the time and through the last decade or two, we have needed to do a lot of the invention and innovation in-house ourselves. But as the market has matured, and particularly timing-wise, as we see a profound shift in investment towards North America, we thought it was the perfect time to open up our innovation hub here in the US. So the Innovation Hub is an arm of the offshore wind innovation unit that's based in Denmark. We have a team of about 12 people. And the hub is the place for all external innovation. So we're a great place if you're a company or an organization that's looking to get in touch with innovation at Orsted, we're a great place for you to land because we can help you navigate the internal company, get you to the right folks. But also we're working on all the programs as far as open innovation and external innovation. So we have the objective of identifying opportunities and startups and new technologies. At times, we may have the ability to finance those startups focusing on next generation technology. And as I mentioned right now, with a focus on offshore wind. We, as I'll talk a little later, we focus our breakdown in sort of three buckets: so your early stage companies, mid stage and growth stage companies, and established companies who may not fit in our particular procurement supply chain processes. We're located in Providence, Rhode Island, here at the CIC. And that was a perfect spot for us because a heavy part of our focus, I usually describe it as about 90% of our focus is on the US. And right now, just based on where the markets and our lease areas are, that is the US East Coast. So Rhode Island is a perfect spot for that because not only is the state investing heavily in offshore wind, we have a bubbling market here locally. We have 10 companies already around us here at the CIC. But it's very easy for us to communicate with and work with, and definitely post-pandemic meet in person with our lease areas and folks that we need to up and down the East Coast. One of the big things that I talk about that's very interesting to me in this role in offshore wind is the need to collaborate industry-wide. I think now I've been in a number of innovation roles over the years with different big companies, and a lot of it is focused solely on your industry vertical. This is a pretty interesting situation where the need to collaborate across industry verticals and sort of in a wide variety of places is absolutely catamount and to solve some of the challenges that we face. So in this role and focusing on the external innovation environment, I'm responsible for collaborating with organizations that are across the spectrum that you see here, and including startup organizations and accelerators and things of that nature. So one of the partnerships that we have, and one of the ways that we're focusing on early stage companies, which is fairly new for Ørsted, is with an organization called See Ahead. Early stage companies have historically been tough for Ørsted to work with because it's an industry where it's really difficult to do in the early stages to allow testing on your assets or your infrastructure, or even in your lease areas. There are a number of things that are required around permitting and quality, health, safety, and environment. So one of the ways that we're starting to support early stage companies is through our partnership with See Ahead. We have 3 sponsored seats for early stage companies that we choose to be part of the See Ahead program. And we're part of supporting their Blue Green Challenge and other initiatives, and their Blue Swell Incubator sponsorship. And so we have the ability to plug early stage companies into a pipeline of experts. We have the ability to bring our experts to the table to help companies that are in See Ahead. And we have the ability to help them navigate and avoid sort of costly mistakes and commercialize hopefully a lot faster. And that's really our goal. Our second partnership, and this hasn't been publicly announced yet, it's coming soon, so you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview here. But a heavy part of the Innovation Hub's focus is on what I would call mid or growth stage companies who are right on the cusp of commercialization. So that might mean they have a product in the market, but it is not highly adopted yet. Or it might mean they are right on the cusp of putting a product into the market and don't have a lot of experience either outside the lab or real world testing. So what we're doing with New Lab, which is a company based in New York and specializes in working with highly technical teams in this stage, is we're developing a program we call the Blue Energy Studio. And we're going to work with companies on highly specified challenge areas that Orsted has, and we are going to design tests for them to carry out and sort of work their way into commercialization and into larger scale proof of value projects with Orsted. So stay tuned over the next couple of weeks for more on that announcement. And lastly, we help experienced or later stage companies that are in different industries, such as Thayer Mahan based in Connecticut that you see here. They're a naval-focused company traditionally, but we think a lot of their technologies can be adapted to the challenges in offshore wind. And so there's not necessarily a normal pipeline through procurement for companies in different industries. So they're not, typical tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers that would go through our procurement supply chain and pipeline. And so the hub can help design specialized projects to work on with a path forward to working with them more. So Thayer Mahan is one example where we're working with their synthetic aperture sonar tests, and we see a lot of future applications for site investigations, marine mammal monitoring, and other challenges. And lastly, I mentioned that we're 90% focused on the US. The 10% that I normally talk about is focused around a platform that we have for what we call open innovation challenges. And so with open innovation challenges, internally, we work with all of our different business units to understand their needs and decide whether or not we think we can go out into the market to find some solutions, particularly technology solutions to those challenges, whether that's short-term or long-term, just to see what's out there in the market. So we may launch these open innovation challenges at openinnovation.orsted.com, and we run them like a typical startup challenge where we have an application period in process. We analyze those applications internally and narrow the cohort down, and then those get to pitch to a panel of experts from the business unit that we're working with, and then there's a sort of a winner at the end where there's various prizes depending on the actual challenge itself. So this is one that we ran at the end of 2020 around wind turbine coating. We worked with our foundation coding team and understood that as turbine design lives continue to increase, we also need to be thinking about how the protective coating increases and in a sustainable way. And so we ran this challenge last year. All of these programs and all of the innovation and R&D that we're doing here in the US and worldwide are with the goal of continuing to keep offshore wind competitive with fossil fuels. As I mentioned earlier, if we continue to increase our production and drive down the cost of green energy, we think we can meet our big, hairy, audacious goal of becoming not only the world's first energy major, but also a world that runs entirely on green energy. So thank you very much for the time to talk about the hub, and I'm very happy to take questions and talk more about it.
Neil, thank you so much. Really, really fascinating. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I also want to make sure that the audience gets some questions in. So, of course, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. So, Neil, first question for me. What are the types of innovations that you're seeing that are successful and that you're integrating? And then follow on to that is, where do you need to see more innovation? What kind of demand signal are you creating in addition to the coatings, for instance?
Yeah, so I think it's different US and globally. I'm going to focus a bit on the US right now. So in the US, I suppose not surprisingly, it's driven a lot by where the projects are in their life cycle. So one of the first things I did when I joined Ørsted in June of last year was we ran a project where we called it white spot mapping. We really met with all of our asset project leaders and all of our company leaders and understood where those challenge areas lie. And I suppose, again, not surprisingly, site investigation is a big area of focus right now. Site investigation can take 5 to 8 years to complete. So it's a very long, very expensive process. It's highly driven by regulation, and as it should be. And so that's an area where there's a lot of opportunity for new technologies to come in and help drive down the cost and time for that. So there's definitely a heavy focus of what I'm working on there. And then there's also this industry-wide challenge, a very, very important one and a very, very difficult one, which is marine mammal monitoring. During construction phase, particularly around piling, we have to be very cognizant of where whales and other marine mammals are, particularly the North Atlantic right whale, which is endangered. And so, right now we utilize a number of technologies such as bubble curtains, and we have infrared cameras on ships, and we have and the ships have protected species observers. But we think there's a lot of ways that autonomous technologies, acoustic technologies, infrared, we think there's ways that all of those things can come together to create a system to help protect marine mammals and help us work on construction in a more efficient way.
That's really fascinating. And it's the kind of thing that, unless you're in the business, you don't necessarily think about as, where you need to see the innovation. My mind is just on, trying to drive down the cost of the electricity, but you obviously have to deal with that entire, the entire community and ecosystem around you. That's really fascinating that it draws on so many different areas. So, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that one of the key things that you needed to work on was the supply chain. And really driving down the carbon footprint of the supply chain. How do you think about that? That seems to be just a challenge across the clean energy industry. It's the supply chain is where many of the issues that we're going to probably be looking at in the next 5 years are.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the hard part about that is it has to be done at scale. So when we think about things like the construction of the turbines themselves, or the transportation of them, or the concrete and other things that are needed to keep cables down and protected. There's all sorts of things where we're using large amounts of material. And so in order to do it, we're going to have to do it at scale. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. So I work pretty close with, we have one of my colleagues in procurement focuses on the future of the supply chain at scale. And so we work pretty closely together, identifying new companies, meeting with them, helping them understand the challenge at a nuanced level. And then, whether it's just expertise or whether it's connections we can give them, sort of steering them in the direction so that they can grow to the point where we can use them at scale. So there are a few companies, for example, in whether it's the actual foundation manufacturing itself. There's a company that we're looking at who can cut the footprint down by a quarter. There's a company in cable protection, which would remove all concrete, be completely green, and also help wildlife growth. So there's a number of companies out there working on that. And I think one of the ways is that we can just help them grow and navigate the space a bit faster.
That's really fascinating. That Orsted is probably helping to change the entire manufacturing process for not just wind turbines, but for a whole range of technologies that are ultimately going to use some of the inputs that you're using. We had a good question from the audience, from Shadi Awad, and asked if you can name a few key technical challenges that Orsted is facing to make a more cost-effective and reliable offshore wind farm.
Sure. I think one of the ones that I'm still dipping my head into, and again, I've only been at Orsted for a year, so there's only so many challenges that I could dive pretty deep on pretty quickly. But in the US, one of the ones is transmission and electrical grids. And again, I don't know enough yet to speak on that at a large scale, but anybody who's interested in that can reach out to me, and we can find the right folks internally to talk to about it. But that's such a big challenge, and that's one that's definitely going to help drive down the cost of electricity.
Got it. And yeah, that's a really hard challenge because there are a number of issues associated with transmission that are political, but also technical, and getting the alignment on those is going to be hard. Now, in your slide, you showed that offshore wind was at a levelized cost of energy one of the cheapest producers of electricity. It looked like only onshore wind was actually cheaper. I had something blocking part of your slide, so I couldn't see all of it, but that's what I saw. So if it's so cheap, why are we not seeing more of it? What are the impediments to actually developing more offshore wind simply on an economic basis?
I mean, subsidies certainly, part of that cost now are subsidies. And I think over time, what we want to do is drive down the cost to a level where we don't need those subsidies. And I think the other is just the difference between onshore and offshore, if you think about it, is the difficulty of constructing them. There's a lot more regulation. There's a lot more in the way, and it means a longer timeline. More resources, both man and machine. So I think that's one of the, again, looking at each piece of the sort of starting with the bid to the site investigation to the construction to the post-operation. If you think about the entire construction sort of phase, or even just wind farm phase, not just the construction phase, each one of those, the more that we can drive down the time it takes to do those, obviously the resource cost comes down. So it's definitely a CapEx, OpEx balance.
Got it. Now, the Biden administration has said that they want 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So there's a lot obviously in the works, and the California announcement opens up more opportunities. But do you think that innovation is going to be part of reaching that goal? Or do you think we can do it with the technology that we have now, and that the innovation is really going to help us move beyond 30 gigawatts to much bigger scale?
I think we can do it with the technology that we have now. I mean, the innovation, we're going to see larger turbines over time, and the larger the turbine, the more power we can output. And so I think we can meet that goal with the technology we have, but it is, again, about making it run more efficiently. So in the short term, it's what can we do to drive down the OpEx costs of doing that? And then in the long term, it's about what can we do to drive down sort of the CapEx cost of doing that. And I think that's the innovation that we're focusing on. It's a bit of a balance between those two. It's what can we do in the short term now, and that's why we have a heavy focus on the commercialization phase, or that growth stage of companies, but with an eye to what does this do for our wind farms in the future. If that answers your question.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that as the turbines are going to get larger, and you had that great slide that showed the sort of tiny, by comparison, turbine from, what was it, 1991, all the way up to today, or the turbine that will be, I guess, in 2022, which is frankly, massive. I think on scale, you had a 747 just to show how big it is. What are the technical challenges as you get larger, as these turbines get bigger? What problems are you trying to solve?
To be quite honest, those are areas that I'm not focused on right now. So it's not something that has been, at least again in this last year, under my purview. Mm-hmm. But I think naturally there's the construction challenge. Whether it's floating or foundation, it means a larger footprint. So That's something that you need to consider as far as seafloor bed, as far as the materials that you use to construct it. And again, the bigger it gets, the more materials, the more we have to think about our supply chain and helping that become green. And so I think those are really the challenges that as it gets bigger, you just need to sort of force multiply everything that you're thinking about around it.
Got it. I know you're not working on this scale problem, but maybe you know the answer, which is you've seen this great trajectory of the growth, the size of these turbines. Is there and that seems to have been a big focus of advancing the offshore wind industry, is really getting more power by building bigger. Is there a point where that stops having, or that at least has diminishing returns, and the focus is on other issues, on efficiency, on just producing more of them?
Yeah, I think so. And we're also already looking at efficiency. I mean, there are a lot of companies that reach out to us, and me in particular, around things that we can retrofit the turbines with to get more power out of them. I'm working with one of my colleagues right now at looking at one of those solutions. So yeah, I think there's definitely a point at which there's really no no getting bigger, and it's about how can we make them a more efficient design to get more out of it.
That's fascinating. Now, the places that have some of the earlier design turbines, you say you can retrofit those. How much improvement are you able to see over their initial design if you were to go back and retrofit them now?
Sure. The companies that reach out, tell us everything from a couple percentage points to we've even seen 5 percentage points, which I think that would be unbelievable. I think, those are still in the test and sort of lab phase. I think there is one company that we're looking at that is somewhere in the range of 1% to 3%, and we're pretty optimistic about the chances of them hitting that and the opportunity there. So we're taking a look at the market. I think it really is going to need real life testing to prove it out. And then you can scale it across the portfolio from there, but it'll start at a very small scale, one to two turbines.
Got it. So these turbines, they're not sort of static, fixed in time. Once you build it, that's the best it'll ever be. You can keep evolving them even when they're when they're either in the ground or floating or whatnot.
Yeah, it's slow, but it's possible. With design lives of, the original ones were 20, now 25 plus, and now even going into 30 plus. You do need to think about ways not only to protect them, to keep them as efficient as they were when they first went up, but also, how to squeeze out every last piece of energy at the right time until there's large scale storage solutions. So,
Cool. Well, we're running out of time. So one final question for you. Just if you were advising a group of college students, ambitious college students who wanted to advance the offshore wind industry, and it was a range of folks, engineers and historians and biologists, what 2 or 3 things would you tell them that you really need their help solving? What are the problems that you want them to work on so that when they graduate in 2 or 3 years, they can help you make this a better industry?
Sure. So great question, and I'm actually working with college students right now as a mentor and a judge through Sea Ahead's Blue Green Challenge here in Rhode Island. And so one of the things that I've talked to them about, as I mentioned earlier, is site investigation. We want to find better ways to map and understand the sea floor, because the more we understand it, the not only the more efficient we can be in the time it takes, the cost it takes, how we put the turbines in, but the better we can be about sort of respecting that space and helping it flourish after the turbine goes in. So that's one of the things I want them to think about. And then I'd say 2 pieces of advice I give them. One is to work with us to understand the actual nuances of the challenge, for sure. But the other is understand the regulations around the challenge. It's such an interesting industry, especially for me coming at it with a fresh pair of eyes, where the collaboration it's not enough for us to just propose solutions. We have to help regulators understand those solutions. They have to approve those solutions, and they have to be safe to be implemented. So that's one of the areas that I find not just students, but most startups overlook, is they don't understand the regulations of the industry. So I think that's one of the, in order to find a solution that will work and be accepted, you need to understand that side of the challenge.
Neil, thank you so much. Really fascinating. You guys are doing really phenomenal work in Rhode Island and across the United States. I hope I am able to visit in Providence, but also get to Denmark to see the headquarters at some point.
Yeah, me too.
Copenhagen's wonderful. I hope you get there as well. So we are out of time. Thank you all for tuning in today, and especially Neil, thank you for this really remarkable presentation.
Thank you very much, Randy.
Insights. You can be sure to connect with Neil on LinkedIn and follow Orsted on Twitter at OrstedUS. Please join us for a couple of other upcoming Atlanta Council Global Energy Center events. On June 3rd at 4:30 p.m., we'll host a discussion on fast reactors, the versatile test reactor, and nuclear safety and nonproliferation. And on June 7th at 8 a.m., we'll host an event on leadership from Norway, electrification and global forest protection. Our next innovation stream will feature C0, a quote turquoise hydrogen company based out of Santa Barbara, and that's planned for early July. Thank you everybody who helped put this event together, including Laura Macedo, Peter Gonzalez, Roger Morales, and Olga Kokova. The presentation will be available on the Atlanta Council website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, so please do share it with your colleagues. Thank you all, and we will see you next time.